Welcome back to another In Session Film bonus content episode, if that's what we're calling these. I'm not entirely sure. But as we do after every Marvel TV show that is released, we are joined by the wonderful Richard Newby to break down these TV shows. Richard is joining us from the hellscape dimension that was depicted in the third episode. So he's gonna need some help from Madison to get out. But thanks, Richard, for being here. Really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so this is going to be an interesting discussion. I do have a pretty good feeling with how you feel about this one, but my God, the discourse around She-Hulk has been insane.
It really has been. More so than I expected, I'll say.
Yeah, I more so than I expected as well. I'm just gonna put my cards on the table right now. I really loved She-Hulk for reasons that we'll get into. I thought it was really fun. But before I get further into it, Richard, what did you think about Marvel's She-Hulk?
Yeah, I thought it was a blast. I thought it was such a refreshing change of pace to kind of go for a sitcom and have these, shorter,
Yeah.
22 to 30-minute episodes. They're just breezy and they're
Hmm.
fun. And I felt like it was such a nice feel good show too, which I felt like was kind of,
Yes.
needed. Especially after, I think, so much, we've discussed this before, but so much of phase four has been, focused on grief. Um,
Yeah, good
there are
point.
certainly
Hmm.
some deeper themes going on in She-Hulk for sure, but I also appreciated that there was just like this sense of levity and like you could know every week you're going to tune into something and like have a good time.
Yeah, exactly. I could not echo that enough. I think what makes She-Hulk really fantastic is that there isn't a single moment in the entire series thus far where it takes itself seriously. There are no stakes here. There's no world changing events. It's just silly fun. Now, there are a few things that will have a ripple effect on the larger MCU, but it's not vital. Like those larger things are not vital to the success of the show or any of the character building here. As you noted, this is a sitcom. It's a silly, fun, Seinfeld esque sitcom where from episode to episode, there's very little or even no connective tissue,
Yeah,
not just to the larger MCU, but to the previous episode. And
yeah,
there's some of that. I mean, they have a little bit of at the beginning previously on She-Hulk. So you're kind of caught up on what's going on. But that doesn't mean the events of what we're about to see has anything to do with what happened on the last episode.
yeah,
And most of the time, the connective tissue I feel like are just small references to things that have already happened. Nothing dramatic in a large scale sense. There's maybe some thematic through lines, but again, those aren't hefty by any means. There are, certainly there's a commentary here on feminism and male toxicity and fandom, and how those
yeah,
two things are always colliding against each other within social media discourse for sure. And that is a broader thing that the show certainly covers. But from episode to episode, the nuances of that are so distinct. Oftentimes, it's done in these silly ways that's a lot of fun. And for me, and with what you said, a lot of what we've talked about in phase four with these Marvel TV shows, they're covering these hefty subjects. And oftentimes I've loved what they've been able to do
for
in
sure.
those other shows. But this is so antithetical. It is just here for silly fun. It's a sitcom, which we haven't seen yet. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was really fun in that way.
Yeah, I only wish that there had been, more like a regular, network sitcom, like because I
Yeah.
could just like watch like how I go
Yeah.
back and watch episodes of The Office like just
Exactly.
constantly. Like I could
Yeah.
definitely do that with this if there were more episodes. It's like
Yeah.
one of those things like what you were saying, like how The Office, like you can tune into any season, any episode, and like
Exactly. And watch it on a singular basis.
yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. And so
Yeah.
I'm definitely hoping that we get a lot more seasons going forward, and maybe like an extended episode count because there's so much like fun to be had here. And honestly, like it's one of those shows too where, even though She-Hulk, is the lead character, I thought the supporting characters were really great and really fun too,
Yeah.
which I
Hmm.
feel like, is so key to what makes a sitcom work. And I think, not that the other shows don't have great supporting characters, but I think that with other shows, you're there primarily for the leads. And, the supporting characters can kind of be like, fun or Easter eggy or have some like great character actors.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, you're really there for, those lead characters. But with this, like, it really felt that, as great as She Hulk and Jen Walters is, like, she's even better because she's part of this ensemble. And so seeing her
Hmm.
back and forth with other characters was a lot of fun.
I agree. I agree. And I think that's what made Abomination, his appearance here, really fun.
Yeah.
Because he is supporting our central character. And what's also really great about it, not only does he come in and he has this nice supporting role, but I've argued forever. I don't know how you feel. I can't remember if we've talked about this, Richard, but on our show, I've argued forever that The Incredible Hulk is one of the more underrated movies in the
I
MCU.
agree. I'm
Yes.
all aboard that train.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm glad. I'm glad we're together on that trade because I think that movie is much better than its reputation.
Yeah.
It is a lot of fun, but for a lot of what we've seen over the last 10 years with Marvel, they've treated that movie as some sort of stepchild
Yeah.
they wanted to get rid of. And I couldn't understand why. Because I always thought it was good and there's a lot of fun to be had there. And then
Yeah.
eventually, over the years, Feige finally started to embrace it, and you get Ross coming into the picture a little bit more. And then now with Abomination, who obviously we saw in Shang-Chi. Was that last year? 2 years ago?
Last
Uh,
year.
yeah, last year.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he's coming, has an appearance here and has more, I think, more appearances than any other cameo uh, in
Yeah.
this entire first season, I believe. So, I mean, he's in here a couple of different times, and
Yeah.
I just love that they're, at least in some way, embracing that movie. So it was just a lot of fun to see that character here once again, and I thought the dynamic was effectively utilized, and of course Wong is great. Gotta love Wong coming in here,
Yeah.
and then there's everyone's new favorite hero, Madison,
Yeah.
with the double ends.
Yeah.
I want that series. That's the spinoff that we have to have next.
I would love a Wong and Madison series.
Exactly. Please make that happen.
Just like her training at the Comertage. She just has like a
Yeah.
little bit of magic. She's struggling. Wong's gonna help
Exactly.
her out a little bit.
Exactly. They could do like the werewolf by night thing where it's like a
Yeah.
50-minute special at the very least. Like it doesn't have
Yeah.
to be like a long feature length movie or full series. You can
Yeah.
just do a little 50-minute. I will direct it. If you don't, I'll do it for free. You don't even have to pay me. I just think it'd be a lot of fun. And the world wants it. So let's make
Yeah.
that happen, Marvel. Come on.
It'd be awesome.
Yeah. Let's dig a little bit further into it. So we mentioned there's Wong, there's Abomination. Obviously, we get Daredevil for the first
We
time as
do.
well, which is very
Yeah.
exciting. So, of these appearances, and of course, Bruce is in the first episode. Uh, what did you think about how the show used all those characters? Did you have a favorite?
Yeah, I love the like walk-ins from different characters because like just having been a fan of the comics, like the She-Hulk comics are very much like that as well, where I think
Yeah, yeah,
at the time they broke a lot of rules in terms of John Byrne's run from the 80s, where each issue was very much like episodic, and there wasn't this kind of like overarching saga like you would see in like the Hulk books, for instance, where you have
sure.
like a
Yeah,
6 issue arc, and somebody's pulling the strings, and
yeah,
each
yeah.
each issue was kind of its own thing, and it still kind of continued up until the latest the current She-Hulk series, where she's taking on different cases, interacting with different people in the superhero community. So I thought that the show captured that really well.
Mm,
um
yeah,
Seeing Daredevil was definitely the highlight. I mean,
yeah,
I love Daredevil.
yeah,
I love the Netflix show. I love
yeah,
everything that Charlie Cox has done with the character. It was great to see him. I mean, we got a little tease. Matt Murdock in No Way Home, but to actually like see him suited up, and
yeah,
also just like get a different side of the character too,
yeah,
which was cool, because I think, so much of the Netflix show was focused on what Frank Miller did. And Frank Miller is great, but like that's only like a very small section of, Daredevil's whole history. And so, for a lot of his history, like before and beyond that, he's been kind of like a more fun, charismatic,
yeah,
almost like a Robin Hood and Errol Flynn type of character. So it's fun to see
yeah.
him tap into that. Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly was different than the R-rated, very intense version that we saw on Netflix, and I loved
Yeah.
the Netflix series as well. So it was to see the fun side of him come out. I do imagine they'll harken back to that in some ways when we actually get to that Daredevil series. But given the tone of She-Hulk, that wasn't necessary here,
Right. And
obviously.
and that's the thing that I think like some people, I saw some complaints online and saying like, "Oh, this is what happens when you let Disney get your hands on the characters. They've like changed his personality." And it's, well, like it's no, like he's fitting into the show that he's in, which is the
Exactly.
same way that like the same thing that comics do, all the time. Like if
Yeah.
Daredevil's going to show up in a She-Hulk book, like he's not going to be like battered
Yeah.
and bloody and contemplating like the end of his life or something like
Yeah.
that. And I'm sure that when Born
Yeah.
Again happens, like it'll be more grounded, a little more familiar. It might not be quite as
Yeah.
dark as the Netflix show, because there are other stories to pull from. But yeah,
Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
definitely the thing of like characters adapt based on like the show or series that they're in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and as we've established, and as everyone saw, this is a silly sitcom in the vein of a Seinfeld. If Christian Bale's Batman showed up on Seinfeld and started brooding and he's screaming at the top of his like, I don't think that would have worked all that well. Like that
Yeah.
just doesn't fit the style of tone, and you
Yeah.
have to consider those things. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll get more of his serious side when we get to his show. But yeah, he was fitting the mold of what She-Hulk was as the silly sitcom, and I thought it was incredible. I really liked that dynamic, and then it all culminates there in that last episode with their Fast and Furious family
Yeah.
dinner, which was really great.
Yeah. That was
So
awesome.
yeah, I loved all of that. I thought it was all of that was handled great, and then of course there's She-Hulk herself. There's Jennifer Walters. I thought Tatiana Maslany was great in this series. I loved the writing of the character and all of the self-awareness that is brought
Yeah.
into it. The meta components are handled beautifully, I think. And obviously she is the star of the show. There are all of these cameos that we've been referencing and talking about, and all of that is fun, but all of it, and the true brilliance of those cameos is that they support Jennifer Walters and what she's experiencing on this show.
For sure.
And that I thought, and that's what makes the utilization of those characters great. But Maslany, her performance I think is very good here. some of the wonky CGI aside, and I'm sure they'll be able to re-render that later on
Yeah.
as the technology gets better. But her performance, I think, is very good, and she really plays up the self awareness of the show in a great way, and really teeters very well on some of the emotional dynamics that the character is going through, and also the sarcasm at play. I think she threads that needle beautifully.
Yeah, there's such like a humanity to her performance, and like such
Mhm.
a sense of charm, and like you said, self-awareness. I think that comes through both, in Maslany's performances as Jin and as She-Hulk, which I think, is a really difficult thing to do. Like, I always laugh when I
Mhm.
see people online saying they should have just gotten a bodybuilder and they wouldn't have had to deal with the CGI. And I'm like, you're not gonna find someone, a bodybuilder, who can act
Yeah,
the way Maslany can. Like the
exactly.
whole like central component of the show and why it works is because of that performance, because
Mhm.
of the emotional complexities and flavor she adds to the character. I mean, like her facial expressions alone, there are so many great moments in the show
Mhm.
where She-Hulk isn't even saying anything, but you're just like watching her face, and her
Yeah,
face is telling so much.
exactly. Yeah,
And I mean, that's like that's something that you can't just like replace.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And she is in She Hulk form for quite a significant time
Yeah.
in the show. And yeah, I mean, you can't have another person doing the acting. And, when she is She Hulk at the time, I mean, when she's at her job, she is required to be in
Yeah.
She Hulk form. So it's not as if the show was trying to avoid that to reduce cost and effects or anything of that sort. Of course, the final episode certainly speaks to that in some really clever and fun ways.
Yeah.
But the show does commit to that, and we do see her in that form quite often, and so she's still acting there, and you need her performance to carry us through a lot of the moments when she's in She-Hulk, and some of that is certainly in the visual cues of the performance in and out of She-Hulk, and of course in the verbal exchanges she has with other characters. But yeah, her performance is vital to the success of this series, as well as the writing and the self-awareness. But she really plays all of that up very well. I thought it was handled
Yeah.
with great diligence and grace, and yeah, I loved it. It certainly had me wanting more. I know they capped this at, I don't even know, 10 episodes, 12 episodes,
I think
whatever
it
it
was
was,
I think it was 9.
9
Yeah,
episodes. Yeah, I could have watched 30 episodes.
for
Like,
sure.
it was just a lot of fun, and a lot of it is certainly what she brings to the table as this character.
Yeah, and like just, even the kind of like meta winks and stuff. Like I think the opening scene of that final episode where they, kind of redo the Bill Bixby Incredible Hulk
Yeah.
intro.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like just
Yeah.
like how well she was able to like capture that vibe, just like with them, like the opening
Yeah.
scene was just
Yeah.
like such a cool moment. Like I feel like she's very versatile. And like I know like people who have seen Orphan Black are probably like, yeah, of course. I haven't seen the show.
Mhm.
It's been on my list, but I haven't gotten to it. But like I think
Same.
that, you know, her versatility is definitely like something that really comes through in this show, and I think that you can like really see, how well she'll fit in with like the other
Yeah.
Marvel characters. Like I'm really excited to see her,
Yeah.
interact with the other Avengers, because she
Mhm.
does have such a fun personality that's also really relatable. Like I feel like the
Yeah.
audience can really relate to her, and I feel like, to have like a
Mhm.
7 foot tall, giant green woman, and have her
Yeah.
be like
Yeah.
the emotional center and the most relatable, figure is really is a credit to Miss Lonnie's performance in the writing.
I agree, and I somewhat alluded to this earlier, but I think what impressed me the most, and this isn't, as you noted, people have expressed how versatile of an actor she is in other projects. But I do still find it impressive how she's able to find a balance of this confidence that she's able to find when she is in She-Hulk form, but because of what she experiences as Jen Walters, once people find out who she is, and there's a lot of, like there's that, what was that, episode 3 or 4, when she's trying to date all of these people,
Yeah.
and no one is interested in her as Jen. But the moment she's in She-Hulk form, people are interested. And
Yeah.
so, there's a vulnerability to the character there that comes through in her performance very well. I can't help but think of that moment when she hooks up with the guy, and the next morning, when he finds out who she really is, he quickly leaves. And
Yeah.
there's a nice medium shot of her reaction to that, and it's kind of heartbreaking in a way, in a comedic, silly, fun way
Yeah.
still. But you still sense the vulnerability in the character, where she realizes that Jen doesn't have much value, at least not comparatively to She-Hulk. But the way she embraces She-Hulk, and she's always trying to find that balance within her identity. The
Yeah.
film obviously does this in a very fun and humorous way. The tone never really dissipates, which I do really, really do appreciate. But in her performance and in the writing, I still think they're able to examine that lostness of identity, or at least how she's having to reshift that identity. It's handled really well, and that's a tricky thing to pull off, I think, from a performance standpoint.
Yeah, like along those lines, like the wedding episode really stood out to me in terms of that, where she
Yeah,
shows up as She-Hulk and the bride is like, "No, like you're
yeah,
taking all the attention away from me. Like you just got to be
yeah,
Jen."
yeah. It's like the opposite effect. Yeah,
Yeah, and so it's just like such a struggle to like find the balance, and like
hmm
different people want her to be different things.
yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting thing.
Absolutely. She's constantly being pulled in all of these various directions because of this alter identity that she has, and so she's always having to lean into, wherever the momentum of the path is taking her, and then also having to deal with the rage factor in that as well. I mean, as she's being awarded for being this great lawyer near the end of the
Yeah,
series, again, her vulnerability is tested, and she succumbs to that rage. So again, it's her having to deal with that identity on multiple levels, and it's done subtly, right? Because the from scene to scene, or from episode to episode, there's not much that's happening dramatically that has any gravitas to it whatsoever.
right.
Yet they're still able to find those complexities in these subtle ways that, is just really brilliant, and just something we haven't seen in the MCU yet.
For sure, yeah, and I mean, like, it's not like it's going like Ong Lee Hulk, where like everything is just like so dramatic and like
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know based in headspace and in the mind
Yeah.
and all that. But like you really do get like a sense of who she is throughout, even like these comedic and like you know just everyday ordinary instances, which I feel like
Yeah.
the show captures really well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I just love the irony too, because in the larger MCU, everything that happens with Bruce is so uh everything is handled with such rigor because the consequences are so dire with him.
Yeah.
So everything is on, amplified to 11. and
Yeah.
and 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 I just love that with She-Hulk, who, again, with her powers essentially being on the same scale, and that is, I think, what I love about that first episode is Bruce is like, "All right, your life is totally changed now,
Yeah.
and you cannot mess up because they'll just see you as this monster, because they've seen me as this monster, and we have 10 years of all of these events happening with Bruce, where people have been terrified to death
Right.
because of what he brings." And I love how they set that up in that first episode, and then the show just scales everything down to this, silly fluffery.
Yeah.
For the most part. So it's like of all the characters with all the powers, I feel like that was selected very intentionally to subvert kind of the big bombasticness of what we've seen with Bruce that could be translated to She-Hulk as well. And yet it's kind of the opposite in many ways. I just love that from a writing standpoint.
Yeah, it's definitely like a cool kind of like foil to Bruce's journey. Uh,
Yeah.
and the fact that
Yeah.
he, has to hide away, and I forget, like in the first episode, he tells her that like she's gonna have to like stay here at this bunker for like a year, and she's like,
Yeah.
no, like we're not doing
Not out of
that.
here. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Just completely undermining everything that we've known about Bruce. Right. We're like, he's like rips out the first two pages. Like, I guess we can skip all that.
Yeah,
Skip the first 5 years of this program or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. I just love that in this show as well. And speaking of Bruce, while we're on that, because I mentioned earlier, and I do love that from a larger MCU perspective, there's really not much going on here that tethers. Really, the two big things is we get introduced to Charlie Cox in a larger way than what we saw with him in the Spider-Man movie, and then Hulk in that final episode introduces his son. Now, the way it's kind of, in the context of She-Hulk, it's kind of this throwaway moment.
yeah,
So, I don't it's not as if the show or that moment is, in building to something that's going to be severe. But for those that know what that cameo represents, it certainly is a nice little stinger for something that's going to come later. But I want to give you the floor as to who Hawk's son is and what that was alluding to.
yeah. So Hulk's son Scar shows up at the end. He's not rocking his long hair. Basically, in the comics, he's kind of like if you mash like Hulk and Conan the Barbarian together. Uh, and he like grew
Yeah.
up on Sakaar, after Bruce had left and come back from World War Hawk. He was back on Earth,
Yeah.
and so he feels like abandoned. And his mom died and his brother died, and he was raised in the gladiator pits. So he's just basically like full of rage and anger, and he comes to Earth to hunt down his dad for basically for abandoning him.
Mm,
And in the comics, it's really interesting because like Bruce has his own like very troubled history with his dad, which the MCU
mm.
hasn't touched on. But for people who
No.
saw the Ang Lee film or have read the comics, know that like Bruce's dad was like very abusive, and like the part of his psyche that is the Hulk like actually developed as a child from that abuse.
Mm,
And so like the gamma bomb just kind of like unleashed that side of his psyche, but it had already manifested. And so
mm,
basically like, it's dealing with this child who is just simply like all rage, who like grew to adulthood in like the span of like 2 years. So he's basically only 2 years old, but like a full
yeah.
grown man.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so like it sets up like a big clash between them, and they eventually like do become allies, um, over the years. But I think that with the MCU, like I think that they are gonna lead to something like a World War Hulk kind of film. But it's interesting to kind of see here where Scar is like introduced. He seems very like just from like the little glimpse that we get of him, like he seems very like I don't know, like timid and not like a Hulk
Yeah.
Conan.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so
He
I'm
doesn't seem like he's upset with anybody, really.
yeah, yeah. So I'm very interested to see how that's going to play out because like where we are now, like basically like the whole like I guess like Hulk family I used to say is like they're very like
Mhm.
nice core at the moment. Like even Abomination, like
Yeah.
he's a pretty good
Yeah,
dude right now.
exactly. Yeah. Him and Bruce have made up I believe that's what he said.
Yeah. So I'm very interested to see,
Yeah.
Bruce has gone through in the comics so many different changes. He was Smart Hulk for a while in the comics, and eventually he returned to Savage Hulk, and there was Gray Hulk in there, and Devil Hulk, and then in the future there's like fascist despot version called
Oh boy.
Maestro. Which I'm wondering, like with the Kang stuff, and the whole multiverse stuff, I am
Oh yeah, you
wondering
could see some of that. Yeah.
if that's kind of what's going to be the setup is like,
Mhm.
in the future, because that was the smart Bruce in the comics. Like the smart Bruce became like so smart and like so overconfident in his abilities that he's like, well, basically, I can run this place better than anybody else,
Yeah.
you know, and
Mhm.
he kills off most of the Avengers and becomes this, basically almost like a Thanos figure.
Oh
So
wow.
I think that would be
Yeah.
interesting, given that we're playing with all these timelines and stuff.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that Marvel has like big Hulk plans in the future. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very curious to
Finally.
see. Yeah, finally, it's been way too long. It's
It
been way
has
too
been.
long.
Yeah,
Uh,
I love that. I'm glad that they're finally embracing the Incredible Hulk is actually a good Marvel movie. We're
yeah,
probably going to lose some listeners for that, but that's okay. I'm willing for that to happen. And I also wanted to ask you about this. So, because you were talking about how bringing in Scar probably going to lead to some sort of World War Hulk or some Hulk adventure, which I am
yeah.
certainly looking forward to. But also, you noted that at least the tease that we got in She-Hulk, it doesn't seem as if they're necessarily following the same formula as with that contentious history of them in the comics. Do you think that well they'll probably have some sort of version of World War Hulk, but do you also think that Scar is maybe being brought in right now first for what they're building toward with Young Avengers?
I've heard that, and I think it's an interesting theory. Although, so there is a character called Hulkling on Young Avengers, but he's not actually a Hulk. He's a Skrull, Kree hybrid.
Hmm.
And so with the Skrulls getting more play in Secret Invasion, I'm curious if he's going to be brought in there. And there's a different path for Scar. My kind of like big galaxy brain theory
Okay.
is that in Kang Dynasty, I think that we're going to go to a future version where we see, because most of the Avengers at this point now have offspring or successors, and so I think
Hmm.
that you know rather than like all of these young Avengers being the next Avengers, I think that like Scar and Love from Thor: Love and Thunder. Um,
Yeah.
Riri Williams, who's going to be introduced in Wakanda Forever. Um, you know, Kate Bishop. Like, I think that we're going to see like a next generation of Avengers that's kind of
Yeah.
separate from the young Avengers. Um,
Okay.
and I think it'll be interesting to kind of see like, because I think a lot of Phase 4 has dealt with legacy, and so I'm kind of wondering, what's the thing that Kang can kind of, I guess, do to wreak havoc on the present day timeline. And I guess that's the idea that like your legacy will fail you. And so what if we go to the
Mhm.
future and like this version of the Avengers, like they couldn't save the world, they couldn't protect it, like they're missing
Yeah.
something that their forebears,
Yeah.
lessons that they couldn't provide. That's my
Yeah.
that's my theory.
That sounds fascinating. I would love to see some version of that. And Marvel is clearly building to something with the Young Avengers or characters of that ilk that may or excuse me, that may or may not be a part of that specific team, but will absolutely be a part of whatever the next phase of Marvel is going to be. Because in addition to the characters you mentioned, we've also seen, forgive me, I can't remember the character's name, but the young kid in Falcon and the Winter Soldier
Yeah,
that I know it.
Eli Bradley.
Oh yeah, Eli Bradley, Wanda's twins, I know are part of that as well.
Yeah,
So, like, we're assuming that at some point those characters will become more heavily involved, in addition to Scar and Kate Bishop and the ones that you mentioned as well. So, yeah, I am really curious to see how that unfolds. And Legacy is certainly going to be a part of that because every single one of those characters that we just referenced absolutely tether back to an original Avenger in some way, or
Yeah.
someone that's been a part of the Avengers in some way. So yeah, I'm really really excited to see where that goes, and I think that's maybe why, because of, and again, it's a brief moment with Scar, so we don't really know. They could completely upend everything when we
Yeah.
actually see him in a real way. But with that brief moment, it seemed like, well, maybe he's not upset with his father. Maybe they're going to veer in a different path with him. So yeah, I'm really interested to kind of see where all of that develops. Let me ask you this. So speaking of, theories, what's going to happen next? So one of the last things we also see is that Abomination is stolen once again. Wong, with absolutely no regard whatsoever, no shame, just completely takes him out of prison again. Is that just a silly reference to them going to fight off, or to have another match, as what we saw in Shang-Chi, or is that maybe leading to something more significant?
I think we're definitely going to see him in a more significant role in the future. I was predicting Thunderbolts until the cast was revealed at D23. It's possible
Yeah.
that he still shows up there, and they just didn't want to spoil She-Hulk.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think that we're going to see uh, more of him in the future. And I mean, and it could even end up being like in a Doctor Strange or a Shang-Chi sequel in a larger capacity.
Yeah. And because that's kind of what I'm thinking, more so the latter than the former. It could have just been a fun little reference to, you know, what we already know with those two, as them fighting in whatever that fighting ring
Yeah,
was that we saw there in Shang-Chi. But I do kind of wonder if, because the way Wong talks to him there is suggestive of something bigger or something more significant down the road,
right.
that they've been scheming for some time. So I do kind of wonder what that is going to build towards. So I was really curious to hear your thoughts.
And I mean,
And
they've kept him in a Marvel's kept him in like a cage for 10 years, so like they're not going to keep
yeah,
him in a cage again. Like they gotta
nah,
they gotta let him out, do
they
something.
got to let him out. And
Yeah,
Tim Roth was having the time of his life on this show.
for
Like,
sure.
he was having a great time. And I love that. I love that they brought him back and that he was having a good time. That just made me feel happy inside.
Yeah,
And this is a slight detour from She-Hulk, but you mentioned Thunderbolt, so I just had to get your thoughts on this. Harrison Ford being recast in the role.
yeah,
One, I want to hear how you feel about that, um, on its own terms. But also, and we've talked about this before, and I know this has been a topic of conversation with many, as far as Marvel not recasting T'Challa.
yeah.
How do you decipher all of that? I'm curious to hear your input.
Yeah, so first, Harrison Ford coming in as Ross, I think it's cool. I think he's really gonna like
Yeah.
bring some gravitas to it.
Uh-huh.
And
Yeah.
from what I've heard, in terms of Captain America: New World Order, um, like things are gonna be really tense between him and Sam. And
Okay. Yeah.
going
Makes
back
sense.
to this is something that I brought up when we talked about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but there I was kind of talking about how I definitely think that Ross, given that when we meet him in the Incredible Hulk, he is trying to replicate the Super Soldier Serum. I definitely think that he was involved in the experiments on Isaiah
Mm.
during the Korean
Mm.
War.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
ages match up. So I
Yeah.
definitely think that they would be familiar with each other. And so I think that, despite the leader kind of being like the big villain that everybody's excited for, I think that like a lot of the thematic confrontation is going to be between Ross and Captain America, and like, the things that you do for the country and how that defines you, and you
Yeah.
know what's excusable and what's not. Um and then in terms of recasting, yeah, it's just it's such a difficult thing because I feel
Yeah.
like obviously, like Ross is not, the same size or import of a character as T'Challa.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
and so like it definitely, makes sense in terms of recasting. But I think it also kind of like speaks to the fact that it's interesting because Marvel clearly had, you know, big plans in motion for Ross. I think a lot of people kind
Yeah.
of assumed that like when William Hurt died, the Thunderbolts would kind of just be like, oh, it's named in his memory, like,
Yeah, I had heard that too. Yeah.
but it's like, well, no, like he's like a very central part of like what we're doing
Yeah.
moving forward. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's difficult because I feel like just the cultural impact of T'Challa is so different. Um,
Yeah.
and I think also like the fact that it was so soon that they started filming after Chadwick passed.
Hmm.
I mean, I think even with William Hurt, I mean, like even not having like the same kind of like standing or even like fan base in the MCU, like the role, like it's not like they started filming New World Order or Thunderbolts like a month or so after
Yeah,
he
exactly.
died, which they did with Wakanda Forever. And so I think that it was just it's a tough predicament because everybody wanted to find the kind of the best way to honor
Mhm.
him. And
Yeah.
so I think
Yeah.
it's kind of in this odd space of like we want to move forward, but then like how quickly should we move forward?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
and you hear the cast interviews, they're very much about not recasting, and I think any actor to come into that situation, like as much as like I do want to see T'Challa again because he is such an important character, not only on the screen but
Yeah.
just like you know in terms of visibility and in terms of his impact. Um, I don't necessarily know if it's fair, in terms of the filming of this film to have a new actor come in and then like everybody feels like they're trying to like fill the shoes of someone that they
Yeah.
recently lost. Like that's an
Yeah.
impossible situation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I very much do understand that, and no disrespect to William Hurt, a great actor whom I've really liked. This last year we talked about Steven Spielberg's AI, artificial intelligence, a film that Brendan and I think is a masterpiece. And his performance in that film is genuinely spectacular. It was one of the best performances of that given year, and you could go down the list. I mean, he's had several great performances, but there's no denying the cultural impact that Chadwick Boseman had with T'Challa. And the thing is, as much as I respect William Hurt as an actor, if you were to walk the streets of America and ask the actor who played Thaddeus Ross,
Yeah.
not sure anyone could tell you outside of cinephiles.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think people would know his
Yeah.
name. And so it's just not the same. So it's hard to really compare. Although that was the discourse, people were certainly having that conversation, and I do understand it because I do know that there was a segment of the community that wanted to recast T'Challa, and maybe that could have been the right thing to do. It's hard for me to really say because I'm just some white guy that has no credence in this conversation whatsoever. But to what you're saying, though, I do think it would have been really challenging for another actor to come in there because whether it would have been fair or not, they would have been compared to Chadwick Boseman. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that would have done that actor a service. I don't know if it would have done, the film or the character moving forward artistically. I don't know if it would have benefited in that way.
Yeah.
Maybe it would have worked. Who knows? But I can understand why, given the cultural impact of Chadwick and how beloved he was as that character, that you're almost putting another actor in an unfair, disadvantaged position from the very beginning.
Yeah.
At least arguably so. I mean, who knows? Perhaps people would have rallied behind the actor and it would have worked out great. I mean, I don't know, but I can kind of see I can see it both ways, I guess.
Yeah, and it, I think that that's like the tough position that they were in, and like I've gone back and forth. Like it's such a difficult thing, Like I definitely want to see T'Challa again because again, like
Yeah.
he's such a important character, and it's not just a
Mhm.
matter of like who is wearing like the Black Panther outfit. I mean, like, yes, it's changed like many times in the comics, but like T'Challa as a character is very significant and like very important. And I think
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
especially, for black audiences to see that kind of representation and that kind of hero,
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
it's an irreplaceable thing.
Which we
Um
saw in 2018. What
yeah,
happened in 2018 is undeniable, right? Like
yeah,
that character, the way people responded to it all, it had an impact that's almost indescribable.
yeah,
I mean, it was a player during the award season. It was so significant.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's crazy. That,
And I mean, there's always gonna be, some part of me that's gonna grieve what we lost. Not just in terms
absolutely.
of like Chadwick Boseman as an actor and like all the wonderful performances that we were robbed of, but also just
Mhm.
like, I'm looking forward to Wakanda Forever, and I think it's gonna be great. And Coogler has never disappointed me, but like, there's always gonna be that in the back of my mind of thinking, what would this have
Yeah,
been like,
absolutely.
with Chadwick and T'Challa? Yeah.
No, I'm with you on that. The I guess if there's a silver lining here, it's that Marvel has put themselves in a position, and maybe cheaply so, but also funly so, if funly is a word, uh, that because of the multiverse, you can recast T'Challa and just explain it away as he's from a different dimension, or
Yeah.
like a different part of the multiverse.
which is
You
what
know,
I'm which I'm is what I'm hoping that they do eventually. Like
mhm.
I completely understand not doing it for Wakanda Forever
Yeah,
because it was so soon, but like I do hope that in Secret Wars, because like I mean just like taking, from the comics, I mean of course it's not gonna follow exactly, but like Jonathan
yeah,
Hickman's Secret Wars, like T'Challa is such a key component of that.
hmm
And like the dynamic between like him, Namor, and Doom is just like one of my all-time favorite, just like kind of like rivalry of
yeah,
kings. And I
sure.
would love to see that in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe it's just time, right? Because it's still very fresh for a
Yeah.
lot of people. I mean, even earlier this year, I was at some friend's house because they were watching Marvel movies for the first time, and it was the first time I had seen some of these movies in a few years, and they got to the part where it was Infinity War. I hadn't
Mm,
seen Infinity War in a few years. I thought it'd be fun to go and hang out with my friends and watch this movie again. The moment Chadwick stepped on screen, I lost it. I
yeah.
absolutely lost it. And so then to think about how I'm going to respond to Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I just don't think any of us are emotionally prepared. Like it's
Yeah.
it's it's going to sting, and I'm looking forward to having that experience for sure. And I think because of that, I think Marvel is and obviously the cast and everyone involved with that movie are aware of it too.
Yeah.
That maybe we just need some time before we get to that. And there's going to be a few more years before we get to Kang and the multiverse of war and everything that's coming. So,
For sure.
maybe in a few years, once.
Yeah. Like I haven't watched Black Panther since Chadwick passed, and it's one of my favorite movies. Like it's like on my letterbox, it's one of my like most watched, and
Mhm.
I haven't watched it since he passed. I'm gonna watch it next week before Wakanda Forever, and I'm just like, there's a little part of me that's just like dreading it. Like I'm excited to revisit it, but like
Yeah, no,
it's also gonna be a gut punch.
yeah,
I did watch Civil War last year,
mm,
and like seeing him in that was just like
yeah, it's
it was
hard.
tough. Yeah,
Yeah, it's real tough. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to what Wakanda Forever is going to bring, and who knows, maybe in a few years we'll see T'Challa on screen again through the multiverse. But yeah, we'll see how all of that plays out. Thanks for indulging me in that. I know I kind of
Oh
threw
yeah,
that on your
no,
anime, but
for
I was
sure.
really curious to hear what you had to say. We went down such a massive detour. So She-Hulk. Back to that. Any other thoughts you have on She-Hulk?
Yeah, I thought it was a really fun show. I feel like given like the discourse around it, like the only way that I could like imagine like someone being offended by it is just like if it's just like if you feel that you're called out for it, like if you're that person, if you're
Yeah.
that dude, one of those dudes on the show who's just
Yeah, exactly.
like harassing,
It's so
women and
funny
just
how they
like
nailed that. They
yeah,
absolutely nailed the response to that show.
they just like predicted it so well, and like the whole like
Yeah.
just watching like the whole like geeks and gamers sector just get like so
Yeah.
like enraged about it. And it's like, well, this is about you. This is you.
Exactly. They knew that's how people would react, and they built it into the show.
Yeah.
Like it is, yeah,
And like
absolutely hilarious.
they weren't even smart enough to like not fall into the
To not
trap.
fall for it.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, that is the brilliance. And the thing, I think that's what I do love about it because it's so obvious. Like it feels so transparent what
Yeah.
the show is doing, and yet they still
Yeah.
respond that way. They don't
Yeah.
care. Yeah, that is really great. And one thing we do need to talk about is that final episode. We haven't even talked about
Oh
that
yes.
specifically yet, and how crazy meta it gets.
Yeah.
Love Kevin. Nice touch with the hat. That was a
Yeah.
brilliant little display there visually. What did you think about the finale?
Yeah, that was really fun. It also goes back to like the John Byrne comics. There's an issue of that where she like tears through the paper in the comic and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
talks
yeah,
to the editors and stuff. And it's like, what are you guys doing in my comic? Like,
yeah,
and so I thought that was really clever. I love the Disney Plus like home screen and her
yeah.
like climbing down.
So
Like
good.
that's
Yeah.
just like I don't know, just like such a like creative, ingenious way to do that.
And I'm sure that tricked a lot of people. They're probably like, "What is going on here?"
Yeah,
Go for the remote.
yeah,
Yeah, no, I love that too. And I think what I really like about not the meta qualities are really fun, but the inspiration behind it, I think, is really great too. Because throughout this whole show, and it's been, as we've noted, it's done in this really fun and comical way. But throughout the entire show, she's constantly being undermined or attempted to be undermined by the men around her, whether it be her supervisors at work or her colleagues at work. Certainly, some of the clients she's had to deal with while on the job. There's the dating sequence that you mentioned. There's the guy at the wedding. Even Bruce and the men at the retreat there that Emil Blonsky has, although they were really great. That whole episode was actually really charming and endearing. I
yeah,
loved all of that. But throughout the whole show, they very intentionally built these male characters attempting to steal this story away from her.
mm,
And it's always her trying to take control of her own narrative. And so then it culminates in this very brazen way where all of these characters come back, and not just Emil, but every male character we've seen in the show is
yeah,
in that final sequence. Bruce somehow coming back from space, and so she has to like call like, "Hey, time out here! Why are all these male characters trying to steal my show? This is clearly not what this is supposed to be."
yeah,
And so she does the Saved by the Bell thing, calls the timeout, and then jumps through the Disney Plus home screen as you're talking about to have a chat with the writers. And I love that. I mean, we've clearly seen those thematic elements in films and TV shows over the last few years, but to channel it in that specific way and then to comment on the Marvel formula inside all of that as
yeah.
well, and the tropes that come with Marvel, I thought that was genuinely really fun and clever and perfect. I thought it was great.
and it makes such sense, like, again, for the tone of the show, because, like, you see, like, Todd, like, Hulk out and, like, this big, like, showdown, and it's like, well, that's not the show. That's not a
Yeah.
sitcom thing, like, I
Yeah.
mean, I love a good, like, superhero clash as much as anybody else, but, like,
Exactly.
that's not where the show, like, felt like it was going, and, that doesn't feel like it's about Jen's journey,
Exactly.
when you do
Yeah.
that, and so, like, I really like
Yes.
that the show actually, like, commented on that and was like, there, because I do think that there is, like, such an awareness and kind of like a pressure with these shows from, like, fan expectations. Like, so many people are like, oh, the
Yeah.
leader's gonna show up at the end, or we're gonna get this, like, army of, like, gamma people, and it's not that, that's not what the show
Mhm.
was. And I feel like so often we kind of see, fandom attempt to, like, bend something into what they want it to be rather than what it
Yes.
is. And I
Yeah.
feel like I love that the show, like, plays with that, and it's like, well, no, like, we're gonna be like, what the show is and what we set out to do with it.
Absolutely. And I had that debate, at least some variation of it with Brendan on episode 505 last week, because, he was talking about how he thought maybe it would be more subversive if they continued the circus there, because for Jen to kind of put a halt to it and then comment in this meta way is almost the expected thing given the structure of the show. And I do understand that argument to a degree, but I think to continue the circus, which could have been fun, but to speak to what you're saying, to have some sort of clash there with Todd turning into another Hulk, and then they're having to deal with that, and it becomes this big fight that feels. I think the big reason that would not work for me is that, one, to have any sort of fight or clash there, that as every, because all of these Marvel films culminate to a big clash,
Yeah,
so it plays into the formula. But more importantly, and you said it steals away from Jen's story. It steals her narrative, and for her to put a halt to it and be like, this is not my story, this is not about me, and this show is supposed to be about me. And as I noted, the whole show, in many respects, is her fighting for control of that narrative from all of these men around her, trying to pry at her and steal from her whatever they can, sometimes very literally.
yeah,
And so for her to gain control and fight for herself through its meta qualities, I thought was the right play. That to me is, it's certainly in line with the structure of the show for sure. And so maybe in a way you could have seen that coming, but I thought that was the right move given that this was always about Jen fighting for her story, and then having to do it with not just the male characters in her show, but the male writers in the writing room, and then ultimately Kevin himself.
yeah,
Like, I love that. To me, that was brilliant.
yeah. It was, yeah. I mean, I think it was a great ending, to the series. I think it fit with what they were going with really well.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And
I
and
just
and also, just, and sorry to cut in real fast, but just with their interaction with Kevin as well, I love that when she asked for the X-Men. It's like, are they coming? Of
yeah,
course, it's like she's speaking for the fans. Like, I
yeah,
love,
yeah,
because we never get to interact with Kevin Feige directly. None of us have gotten a chance to, like, this is the closest I feel like us as the fans have gotten a chance to speak to Kevin Feige.
yeah,
So it's like she is there as our lawyer, if you will, in the courtroom. We're there with Kevin Feige, and she's getting to ask the questions on our behalf,
yeah,
which I think is really interesting. And then of course she's talking, like, she asked about herself being in another movie. Kevin's like,
yeah,
no, that's not happening. Like, that was also a nice little clever element to that.
yeah, for sure, definitely.
Any other thoughts? Any final thoughts? I think we've
Um,
covered a lot of it here.
yeah, I think this. I really liked Jamila Jamil's Titania. I
Oh
thought she was
yeah, yeah,
fun.
yeah. Yep.
and Nikki Ramos as Jen's BFF.
Oh yeah, like her friend. Yep, that
Yeah,
was really fun.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I really liked a lot of the supporting characters here. You know, from episode to episode, they were all really good. I can't remember the character's name, but the one that plays like her tailor, like for her
Oh
superhero
yeah,
suits,
yeah.
was that was really fun. Yeah,
I
the whole
also I
show.
also love the fact that that Taylor, he's like such a like he is in the comics, but like he's only appeared in like 2 issues of
Mm,
like this like really obscure, Marvel book from the 70s.
yeah,
So I love when they like do these like deep
yeah, yeah,
cuts. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and it was a nice little way to bring in Daredevil because ultimately that's partial, at least partially, why he's on the West Coast is I guess for this case that he's part of as a lawyer, but also I need a new suit for my show
Yeah.
that's coming
Yeah.
up. So it was a nice little way to tether all of that together. But yeah, I'm with you. A lot of fun. We are big fans of She-Hulk. A lot of people are not, but I imagine if you're still listening, you probably agree with this. So anyway, thank you, Richard, for being here. As always, man, a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is always fun.
So tell us about some of the fun writing you get to do. You do some awesome work at the Hollywood Reporter. You also have a book that is available for people to buy. Tell us about it. Where can people get a hold of your work?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Richard L Newby. I post all my articles there. I have some stuff for THR and AV Club and Fangoria. And then I have a short story collection of horror stories called We Make Monsters Here, which is available on Amazon and paperback. And the link to that is also in my Twitter bio.
Absolutely. Please go and check out Richard's work. Amazing, amazing stuff. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in here. Uh, our patrons will get early access to this. So if you're a patron of ours, thank you for your support. If you're a non-patron, you can sign up at patreon.com/InSessionFilm. You get early access to all of these episodes. And quickly just want to plug on our latest podcast, we are starting to conclude our Studio Ghibli movie series. On episode 506, we talked about The Wind Rises and The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. It was an epic show. We love both of those films. Please go and listen to that. And if you're a fan of Scorsese, our Extra Film podcast is continuing their Scorsese series. So you might want to go and check all of that out as well. With that, thank you everyone for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thanks again, Richard, and we will see you all next time.